The first sign that the prophecy was true wasn't a bang, but a whisper, a dead one. For 6 years, Arlo Finch had lived inside the metal guts of the Starship Odyssey. His world, the hum of life support and the crackle of deep space static. His job, his entire reason for being a quarter of a galaxy away from his daughter's sickbed, was to listen. He was a communications specialist, a glorified ear for humanity. And for 6 years he had listened to the symphony. Every star system had its own music. The gravitational pull of gas giants created a low, mournful hum. Pulsars were the galaxy's drummers, beating out frantic, perfect rhythms. Nebulae hissed and sighed. It was a chaotic, beautiful noise, and it was the sound of a universe brimming with life. The old stories, the ones they told kids back on Earth about a cold, empty void, were dead wrong. Space was loud. Until today. They had arrived at Kepler-186f, the fifth planet in a dim red dwarf system. A place their probes had promised was a paradise, a super Earth, teeming with complex biosignatures. The probes had picked up signals, intricate patterns of electromagnetic waves that were too ordered for nature. It was the jackpot, the thing every human since the dawn of time had looked up and wondered about. Intelligent life. They'd named the planet Aethel, an old word for homeland. Arlo sat in his comms chair, the worn cushioning molded to the shape of his body. He stared at his console. The main screen, which should have been alive with pulsing green and blue lines, a visual representation of the planet's vibrant voice, was flat. A single, dead white line stretched from one end to the other. It was the color of a bone, the color of silence. Anything, Mr. Finch. Captain Eva Rostova's voice was sharp, cutting through the low thrum of the bridge. She stood behind him, a statue of starched angles and military discipline. Her reflection in the dark screen was a stern ghost. "No, Captain," Arlo said, his own voice sounding thin. He tapped a command, recalibrating the entire array. "Nothing. Not a peep. I'm running a full diagnostic, but the equipment is fine. It's the planet. It's just quiet." "Define quiet," Rostova snapped. She didn't like ambiguity. "I mean dead quiet. Quieter than intergalactic space. T here is no atmospheric discharge, no magnetic field resonance, nothing. It's like someone put the entire world on mute." He swallowed hard. The silence wasn't just in his headphones. It felt like it was pressing in on the ship, a physical weight. He'd never felt anything like it. It was unnatural. A vacuum inside a vacuum. "That's impossible," said Dr. Lena Petrova, the ship's xenobiologist from her station across the bridge. "Our long-range scans showed a complex biosphere. The signals we detected were deliberate, structured. They were singing, for lack of a better word." "Well, the choir has gone home," Arlo muttered. He kept fiddling with his console, a nervous habit. He thought of his daughter, Lily. He had a picture of her taped to the edge of his monitor. A 7-year-old with his dark hair and a smile that was missing a front tooth. The doctors said the new gene therapies were expensive. This mission was paying for them. He was listening to the stars so she could have a future. What a stupid romantic way to think about it. "Boost the gain," Rostova ordered. "Full power. I want to hear a microbe fart down there if it's possible." Arlo's fingers flew across the control panel. He felt a surge of power from the ship's core run through his station. The gain needle crept into the red. A low hiss filled his ears, the sound of their own systems straining, and then, beneath it, something else. A flicker. A ghost. "Wait!" he said, holding up a hand. "I've got something." It was a thread of a signal, so faint it was barely there. A single, wavering tone, like the last note of a song played on a dying music box. He isolated it, amplified it, cleaning out the static. The sound filled the bridge. It was a melody of a sort, but it was filled with a sense of crushing sorrow. It was the saddest sound Arlo had ever heard. It played for 10 seconds, a fragile looping pattern of despair. And then it stopped, not faded out, stopped, like a string being snipped. The absolute, perfect silence crashed back in heavier than before. Across the bridge, Jax, the hulking engineer, crossed himself. He was a man who believed in God and engine schematics in that order. "What was that?" Lena whispered, her face pale. Arlo stared at the flat white line on his screen. The little ghost was gone. He felt a cold dread snake up his spine, a feeling he couldn't explain. He thought about the old scrolls they'd found on Mars, relics of a dead civilization. They spoke of a coming age called the Great Silence. Most scholars thought it was a mistranslation, some apocalyptic myth about the end of the universe. He looked at the dead planet on the main view screen. A beautiful blue and green marble swirled with white clouds. A perfect cradle for life. A perfect tomb. The prophecy didn't say the universe would end. It just said it would fall silent. Arlo had a sudden terrible thought, a thought so insane he almost laughed. What if the prophecy wasn't about an event? What if it was about an arrival? The silence from Aethel was a sickness. It seeped through the hull of the Odyssey, infecting the mood of the 5-person crew. It was in the way they moved, the hushed tones of their conversations, the nervous glances they exchanged over nutrient paste in the mess hall. For 2 days they orbited the quiet world, running scans that all came back with the same contradictory, maddening results. Life signs, abundant. Atmospheric composition, perfect. Technology signatures everywhere. Communication signals. Several. It was a party with all the guests and decorations, but the music was off and everyone was holding their breath. Arlo felt the silence most acutely. It lived in his head now, a constant, low-grade hum behind his thoughts. His headaches had started on the 2nd day. A dull, persistent ache behind his eyes that no amount of caffeine or painkillers could touch. He told himself it was stress, lack of sleep. But he knew it was something else. It was the sound of the silence. He replayed the recording of the final, dying signal 100 times. The Song of Sorrow, he called it in his logs. Lena, the biologist, had run a fractal analysis on it. She'd found it was impossibly complex, containing layers of information that were mathematical, biological, and emotional, all at once. "It's a warning," she said, her eyes wide as she showed him the data on a tablet. Or a lament, or both. The final phrase, just before it cuts off, it translates loosely to something like, "We are sorry. We must go where you cannot hear." It's poetry, Arlo. A suicide note. Captain Rostova was having none of it. She was a woman of action, and inaction was a kind of poison to her. She saw the silence, not as a mystery to be respected, but as a problem to be solved. An obstacle. "It's a cloaking technology," she insisted during the bridge meeting. Her voice was a hammer, trying to nail down their fear. "They detected our approach and went dark. Standard defensive posture. They're cautious. We need to show them we're not a threat." "By doing what, Captain?" Arlo asked, rubbing his temples. The headache was a sharp spike now. "Shouting hello? We don't know what we're dealing with, that last signal. it didn't feel cautious. It felt terrified. "Your feelings are not mission parameters, Mr. Finch," Rostova said, her gaze like ice. "Dr. Carter, your assessment." Dr. Ben Carter, the ship's psychologist and medic, cleared his throat. He was a small, neat man who always seemed to be observing everyone, including himself. Anxiety levels are elevated across the crew. That's to be expected. The cognitive dissonance of the situation. A world that screams life in every scan, but is audibly silent, is disconcerting. Arlo's headaches are likely a psychosomatic manifestation of this stress. "I recommend we proceed, but with caution. A landing is the only way to get real answers." Rostova nodded, a thin, satisfied smile on her lips. "My thoughts exactly. We go in. Shuttle prep in 1 hour. Finch Petrova, you are with me." As Arlo returned to his calm station, he felt a wave of dizziness. For a second, the flat white line on his screen seemed to bulge, to warp, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. He blinked, and it was gone. Just a straight, dead line. He put his head in his hands, the pain behind his eyes, making the lights of the bridge swim. He thought he heard a whisper, not through the comms inside his own skull. It wasn't a word, just a feeling of being noticed, a feeling of pure, undiluted panic that wasn't his own. "You okay, man?" Jax's heavy hand landed on his shoulder, making him jump. The engineer's face was creased with worry. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Arlo forced a shaky smile. "Just tired, Jax. Long couple of days." "This place," Jax said, his voice low, looking at the view screen showing the silent planet. "It ain't right. Feels like walking into a church after a funeral." Arlo nodded. Jax, the man of faith and mechanics, had put it perfectly. That's exactly what it felt like. And they were about to go stomping through the graveyard. An hour later, strapped into the landing shuttle, the Stork, Arlo felt the familiar shudder of detachment from the Odyssey. Through the small viewport, he watched the mother ship shrink, leaving them alone. Below, Aethel grew, filling the window with its deceptive beauty. The silence followed them down. The shuttle's comms, which should have been filled with the hiss and crackle of atmospheric entry, were eerily clean. All he could hear was the breathing of Rostova and Lena, and the frantic pounding of his own heart. The headache was worse now, a throbbing band around his skull, and the whispers were back, faint, fragmented, like snatches of a conversation from a distant room. But the conversation was made of fear. It was the sound of a billion voices screaming in a frequency he wasn't supposed to be able to hear. As the shuttle broke through the cloud layer, revealing the landscape below, Lena gasped. Arlo leaned forward, his pain forgotten for a moment. Spread out beneath them was a city, but it was like no city he had ever seen. It was made of crystal, it seemed, great spiraling towers that caught the light of the red sun and fractured it into a million rainbows. The structures weren't built. They looked grown, like colossal, petrified trees of glass. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and it was utterly, completely still. No lights moved within the towers. No ships flew between them. The heart of a civilization, dead and silent. "My God," Lena breathed. Rostova was grimly triumphant. "See? I told you. Technology. They're here. They're just hiding." Arlo wasn't so sure. As they descended toward a flat, open plaza in the center of the crystalline forest, he felt that alien panic rise up in his mind again, sharp and clear. It was a single, coherent thought that bloomed in the noise. They're here. The Stork landed with a soft hiss of thrusters, its landing struts settling on a surface that looked like polished obsidian. When the hatch opened, the air that flooded the shuttle was sweet and clean, thick with the smell of alien pollen and damp earth. It was the air of a vibrant, living world. But the sound that came with it was the sound of nothing. Stepping out onto the plaza was like stepping into a photograph. The three of them, Arlo, Rostova, and Lena, stood in their environmental suits. Though the ship's sensors confirmed the air was breathable, it was a precaution. A useless one, Arlo thought. Whatever danger was here, it wasn't something a filter could stop. The silence was a physical presence. On Earth, even in the quietest wilderness, there was always sound. The whisper of wind, the rustle of a leaf, the buzz of an insect. Here there was only the sound of their own bodies. The soft puff of the suit circulators, the thud of their magnetic boots on the crystalline ground, the blood roaring in their ears. The wind moved through the towering crystal spires, but it made no noise. It was a silent wind, a ghost's breath. "Incredible," Lena whispered, her voice tinny over the short-range comm. She knelt, touching the ground with a gloved hand. "This isn't obsidian. It's some kind of bio-organic polymer. It's constructed, but it feels alive." Rostova surveyed the silent city, her helmet turning this way and that. Her rifle was held at a low ready. Spread out. Standard search pattern. Look for inhabitants, power sources. Anything that tells us who these people are and why they're giving us the silent treatment. Arlo's headache had bloomed into a full-blown migraine. Each pulse of his heart was a hammer blow against his skull. The silent crystalline towers seemed to press in on him, their geometry all wrong, bending in ways that hurt his eyes. He felt watched, not by a person, but by the place itself. The city was a giant, sleeping eye, and there were specks of dirt on its lid. He followed a wide, curving avenue that spiraled up toward one of the smaller towers. The architecture was breathtaking. Walls flowed like liquid, and structures that should have collapsed under their own weight stood gracefully, defying a physics he didn't understand. There were doorways, smooth and arching, leading into dark interiors. There were windows like multifaceted jewels, but there were no doors, no signs of wear, no trash, no graffiti, no evidence that anyone had ever actually lived here. It was a model city, a museum piece. "Find anything, Finch?" Rostova's voice crackled in his ear. "Negative, Captain. It's empty. Too empty it feels wrong." "Stay focused," she ordered. He walked on, the rhythmic clank of his boots, the only sound in the universe. He passed a park-like area with strange metallic flora that looked like sculptures of plants rather than actual plants. Nothing moved. No alien squirrels, no crystal birds. Just this profound, suffocating stillness. It was the stillness of a held breath, an entire world waiting for an exhale that would never come. His head throbbed. The whispers were getting stronger, clearer. He could almost make out words now, not in English, but in raw emotion. Pain, fear, noise. So much noise, make it stop. He stumbled, catching himself against a low, curving wall. He squeezed his eyes shut. The pain was immense. Was he going crazy? Was this just the pressure of the mission as Carter had suggested? Some kind of deep space psychosis. Remember, this felt external, this was being done to him. He pushed himself off the wall and saw it. A building, if you could call it that. It was different from the others. Lower, rounder, like a giant. Smooth geode that had been cracked open. Inside it glowed with a faint residual light. Drawn by a curiosity that overrode his fear, he stepped through the arching entrance. The air inside was different, warmer, and the silence was deeper, if such a thing was possible. The chamber was circular, its walls covered in intricate swirling patterns. In the center of the room stood a single, waist-high crystalline pedestal. It pulsed with a soft internal luminescence, the source of the room's light. He approached it slowly. This felt important. This felt like a place of power, a temple maybe, or a tomb. His glove reached out almost of its own accord. His training screamed at him not to touch anything, but a stronger, more primal urge compelled him. He needed to know. He pressed his gloved palm against the cool, smooth surface of the crystal. The world exploded. It wasn't a sound. It was a torrent of sensory input that bypassed his eyes and ears and poured directly into his brain. He saw images, 1,000 years of history, in a single blinding second. He saw beings of pure light and sound dancing in the crystal city. They didn't speak, they sang. Their songs built the towers, grew the food, healed the sick. Their entire civilization was a symphony. Then he saw the Odyssey arriving, a tiny metal speck dropping out of hyperspace. But it wasn't a silent arrival. In this new sense, the ship was a screaming, roaring monster. It wasn't the engines. It was the thoughts. The chaotic, jumbled, selfish, fearful, arrogant thoughts of the human crew. A cacophony of psychic noise, a tidal wave of static and raw, unfiltered consciousness. He saw the beings of light, the Lumina. Their name bloomed in his mind, recoiling. He felt their agony as the human noise washed over them, shattering their symphony, turning their songs to shrieks of pain. It was like acid on their very souls. And he saw their final, desperate act. They gathered in rooms just like this one. They sang one last sorrowful song, a song of severance. A song that deliberately, carefully, and permanently shut down the parts of their minds that could sing, that could communicate, that could connect. A choice to become mentally deaf, dumb and blind, to retreat into an internal silence so profound that the human noise could not reach them. It was not a defense. It was a self-inflicted lobotomy on a planetary scale. The vision ended. Arlo was on his knees, gasping for air that wouldn't come. His helmet was filled with the sound of his own ragged scream. He had his answer. The great silence wasn't an empty galaxy. It was a galaxy that had heard humanity was coming, and had chosen to kill its own mind rather than listen. Lena was the first to find him. She came running, her movements clumsy in the bulky suit, her voice a frantic buzz of concern in his helmet. Arlo! Arlo! What is it? What happened? He was still on his knees inside the glowing geode, shaking violently. He couldn't speak. The aftershocks of the vision still echoed in his skull. It was like having your mind scraped raw with a rusty file. The pure, agonizing empathy he had felt for the Lumina was a poison in his veins. He had not just seen their final moments, he had lived them. He had felt their beautiful, harmonious consciousness shatter into a million pieces under the psychic assault of his own species. Grrr! Get the captain! He finally managed to choke out, his voice a ragged whisper. When Rostova arrived, her posture was rigid with suspicion. Finch, report. What did you touch? Arlo looked up at her, and for the first time, he didn't see a commanding officer. He saw a blind woman marching confidently toward a cliff's edge. "The pedestal," he croaked, pointing a trembling finger. "It's a record, a library." "A library of what?" "Of us," Arlo said, the words tasting like ash. "Of what we are, of what we do to them." He tried to explain. He described the beings of light, the city of song, the symphony of their existence. He explained how their ship wasn't just a physical object to the Lumina, but a psychic abomination, a vessel leaking pure, chaotic noise. He tried to put into words the horror of their choice. To perform a kind of spiritual suicide, to sever their connection to the universe, to each other, just to escape the deafening roar of human consciousness. Lena listened, her helmet tilted, her hands clasped in front of her. He could see her face through her visor, pale and stricken. She, the biologist who had dreamed her whole life of finding new life, was beginning to understand that they were not discoverers. They were a disease. Rostova, however, was unmoved. Her face was a mask of skepticism. "Hallucinations, Finch. This place is playing tricks on you. The atmosphere, some kind of low-frequency resonance, residual psychotropic compounds. Dr. Carter warned us about this." "It wasn't a hallucination," Arlo shouted, finding a sudden surge of strength. He staggered to his feet. "It was real. I felt it. They aren't hiding, Captain. They're gone. They erased themselves because of us." "That's the most absurd, self-aggrandizing thing I've ever heard," Rostova shot back, her voice dripping with contempt. "You think we're so important that an entire civilization would commit mass suicide just because we showed up? Get a grip on yourself. It's not about importance," Arlo yelled, stepping closer to her. "It's about volume. We're loud, Captain. Our thoughts are loud. We can't hear it, but they can. To them, we are a walking, talking nightmare. We are the screaming ones." The name came to him from the vision, a perfect, chilling descriptor. Lena finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Captain, his bio-readouts are off the charts. Tachycardia, elevated cortisol, abnormal neural activity. Something happened to him." "Yes, something did," Rostova said, glaring at Arlo. "He's had a psychotic break. We're going back to the shuttle now. This landing is over." She turned to Lena. "You saw nothing but an empty city, correct?" Lena hesitated, looking from Rostova's iron expression to Arlo's desperate face. "It's empty, yes, but it's not normal. The silence. The silence is a puzzle we will solve with science, not with ghost stories," Rostova cut her off. "Let's go." The walk back to the Stalk was the longest of Arlo's life. The beautiful crystal towers no longer looked like art. They looked like headstones. The silent city was not a museum. It was a crime scene. And he was one of the murderers. His headache was gone now, replaced by a hollow, aching clarity. The whispers in his head were gone too. The vision had tuned him in, and now he could feel the absence. He could feel the profound, unending silence of the Lumina's self-imposed prison. It was the emptiest feeling he had ever known. Back on the shuttle, Rostova ordered him to the medical bunk and had Lena sedate him. He didn't fight it. As the drug flowed into his arm, making the world swim and soften, he locked eyes with Lena. He saw fear in her eyes, but also a sliver of belief. That was enough. His last thought before sleep took him was of the city. He pictured it in his mind, the silent spires under the red sun. He had called it a ghost city. He was wrong. A ghost is the echo of something that once lived. This was worse. This was the echo of something that had chosen to die. They hadn't found a ghost city. They had found a city of ghosts, ghosts that were still alive, trapped inside their own silent minds, waiting for the screaming to stop. And the screaming was them. It was humanity. Arlo woke up in the Odyssey's medbay. The gentle beeping of a vital signs monitor was the first sound he heard, and for a moment he felt a wave of relief. It was a normal sound, a human sound. Then the memory of the Crystal City crashed back in, and the beeping became an irritating, meaningless noise. Dr. Carter was sitting in a chair beside his bed, reading a datapad. He looked up when Arlo stirred. "Welcome back, Arlo. How are you feeling?" "Like I was right," Arlo said, his voice hoarse. He sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He felt weak, but his mind was sharp, terrifyingly so. "Did you tell her?" "Did Lena tell the captain what I said?" "She did," Carter said, setting his datapad aside. He adopted his professional, soothing tone. "Captain Rostova has logged your experience as an incident of acute environmental psychosis. She believes you were affected by an unknown neuroagent in the atmosphere of Aethel." "And what do you believe, Ben?" Arlo asked, looking him straight in the eye. Carter's professional mask flickered for a second. He looked away, adjusting his glasses. "The data is anomalous. Your brain activity during the event was unlike anything I've ever seen. It wasn't a standard hallucination. It looked more like your brain was processing a massive, non-auditory data transfer. But the conclusion, that we are some kind of psychic plague, it's a difficult hypothesis to accept." "Because it makes us the monsters," Arlo said flatly. "And we're supposed to be the heroes of this story." Before Carter could respond, the medbay door slid open and Lena rushed in. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and terror. She was holding a datapad, clutching it like a holy text. "Arlo, you were right," she said, her voice breathless. "You were right about everything." She turned to Carter. "Ben, you need to see this." She handed the datapad to Carter. Arlo got up and stood behind him, looking over his shoulder. On the screen was a complex, star-like diagram. "After we got back, I couldn't stop thinking about what Arlo said," Lena explained, talking fast. "The city of song. The idea that their technology, their very structures, were built with sound. So I ran a deep spectrum analysis on the material samples we took from the city. The bioorganic polymer. I bombarded it with different frequencies, looking for a reaction." She pointed to the diagram. "For hours, nothing. Then I tried playing the Song of Sorrow back at it. The recording Arlo made of their last signal." The diagram on the screen shifted. Lines of light began to flow from the center of the star-like pattern, connecting different points, forming intricate new shapes. They looked like words. They looked like a language. "It's a key," Lena whispered in awe. "The song is a key. It unlocks the information stored within the very structure of the material. It's a library, just like Arlo said. A library written into the walls of the city itself." Carter stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. "My God. I've only been able to get our ship's AI IV to translate a few fragments," Lena continued, her finger tracing the glowing lines. "It's not language as we know it. It's based on mathematics, emotional resonance, and harmonic theory. But the fragments we have, they're terrifying." She brought up a text box on the side of the screen. A few translated phrases floated there in stark white letters. "The coming of the screaming ones. A cacophony of the self, a storm of I. To hear them is to break. To think their thoughts is to unravel. The great silence is our only refuge, our final sanctuary. Arlo felt a cold vindication wash over him. It wasn't madness. It was true. He looked at Carter. The psychologist's face was ashen. The difficult hypothesis was now staring him in the face, written in the language of the victims. "We have to show this to Rostova," Carter said, his voice strained. "I tried," Lena said, her shoulders slumping. "She won't see me. She said the matter is closed. She's in the command center with Jax, planning a second contact attempt. She wants to use the main communication dish to send a powerful broad beam transmission directly at the city. A hello, she called it." Arlo felt a spike of pure terror. No, she can't do that. He remembered the vision. The agony of the Lumina. Their self-imposed silence was a desperate, fragile shield. A broad beam transmission, powered by the Odyssey's reactor. Wouldn't be a hello. It would be a battering ram against the door of a silent monastery. It would be like setting off a bomb in a quiet room where people had cut out their own eardrums to escape the noise. "We have to stop her," Arlo said, his voice low and urgent. "What they did, it was a choice, a horrible choice, but they made it to survive. If she sends that signal, she won't just be knocking on the door, she'll be burning the whole house down." He grabbed his uniform from a chair. There was no more time for debate, no more time for convincing the skeptical. The archives had revealed the truth. The prophecy of the Great Silence was real. It was a warning that humanity was a walking, talking apocalypse. And Captain Rostova, in her blind ambition, was about to prove it. The bridge of the Odyssey was a place of tense, focused energy. Captain Rostova stood at the central command console, her back straight, her jaw set. Jax was at the engineering station, his big hands flying over the controls, diverting power to the main communications array. The air hummed with the buildup of energy. It felt like the moment before a lightning strike. Arlo, Lena, and Carter burst onto the bridge. The door hissed shut behind them. "Captain, stop!" Arlo yelled. His voice echoed in the suddenly silent room. Jax froze, his hands hovering over a panel. Rostova turned slowly, her eyes flashing with anger. "I gave no one permission to enter the bridge," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Dr. Carter, your patient should be in the medbay." "He's not my patient, Eva. He's a witness," Carter said, stepping forward, holding up the datapad with Lena's discovery. "You have to see this. We have proof. The city itself confirms Arlo's story. It's a library, and it tells us exactly why they're silent." Rostova glanced at the datapad with dismissive contempt. "I am not interested in fanciful interpretations of alien graffiti. I am interested in making first contact, a goal you all seem to have forgotten." "This isn't first contact, it's an assault," Lena pleaded. "Their silence is a shield, a fragile one. If you hit it with a signal that powerful, you could kill them. You could shatter their minds." "That's a risk I am willing to take," Rostova said coldly. "We came all this way. We are not leaving with nothing but a madman's fairy tale." Arlo stepped forward, positioning himself between Rostova and the communications console. He looked her in the eyes, trying to pour all the conviction, all the horror of what he knew into his gaze. "Captain, think about it. All of it. The Galactic prophecy. The story of the Great Silence. We thought it was a myth about the universe dying out, but it wasn't. It was a warning, a survival guide for every other species out there. It was about us." He took a deep breath. The prophecy is a fire alarm, and we are the fire. Jax the engineer looked from Arlo to the captain, his face a mask of confusion and dawning fear. "Captain," he said, his voice a low rumble, "maybe we should listen. What Arlo is saying, it feels true. This whole place feels cursed." Rostova's face hardened into a mask of pure, unyielding will. She saw her crew crumbling, succumbing to fear and superstition. Her entire career, her entire identity, was built on pushing forward, on breaking barriers, not cowering before them. "I am the captain of this ship," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "My orders are law. Jax, power up the transmitter. That is a direct order." Jax looked at the control panel, then at Arlo's desperate face. He was a man caught between two faiths, his loyalty to his captain and the cold dread in his gut. He swallowed hard. "Aye, Captain." His hand moved toward the final activation switch. "Don't do it, Jax," Arlo begged. But the engineer's training, his years of following the chain of command, won out. He flicked the switch. A deep, powerful hum vibrated through the deck plates of the ship. On the main view screen, the image of our silent planet remained unchanged. For a moment, nothing happened. Arlo's heart sank. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe it was all in his head. Then it began. It started in Arlo's mind, a single piercing shriek. It was a sound of pure, refined agony, a sound that had no physical component, but was so loud in his head that it dropped him to his knees, hands clamped over his ears as if that could help. It was the psychic scream of a mind being forcibly reawakened, only to be tortured. Through the pain, he saw an image, clearer than the vision in the city. He saw a lumina, a being of soft internal light, huddled in the darkness of its own silent mind. And then the signal from the Odyssey hit it, a spear of raw, chaotic energy. The lumina's light flared violently, twisting and contorting. Its symphony, the core of its being, was shredded by the meaningless, brutal noise of the human transmission. It was like forcing a master musician to listen to a billion chainsaws. On the main view screen, the planet itself began to react. A tremor ran through the crystal city. A single hairline crack appeared on one of the largest towers. Then another. And another. The entire city, a structure built and sustained by harmony, was being shaken apart by the dissonance they had just unleashed. The psychic scream in Arlo's head was joined by another. And another. A chorus of resurrected souls crying out in torment, before being extinguished. The fragile sanctuary of their great silence had been breached. Their last refuge was being destroyed. Lena was sobbing, her hands over her mouth. Carter stood frozen, his face a picture of scientific horror, realizing the hypothesis was being proven in the most gruesome way possible. Even Jax had stumbled back from his console, his face white with terror, finally understanding what he had done. Only Rostova stood firm, but the triumphant gleam in her eye was gone, replaced by a dawning, sickening comprehension. She stared at the screen, at the beautiful city that was now beginning to crumble, at the silent world that was now screaming in a way only one man on their ship could hear. She had wanted to make them talk. She had succeeded, and the first thing they said was a scream of death. The screaming in Arlo's head did not stop. It was a constant high-pitched keening, the sound of a billion souls being torn apart. He lay curled on the floor of the bridge, shivering as the aftershocks of Rostova's broadcast ripped through the planet below and the minds of its inhabitants. The crew was a study in disintegration. Lena was trying to help Arlo, her hands fluttering uselessly around him, tears streaming down her face as she muttered, "What have we done? What have we done?" Dr. Carter was at a science station, his fingers flying across the controls, his face grim. He was documenting the murder, collecting the data from the crime scene. Jax the engineer was the worst. He had backed into a corner of the bridge, his eyes wide and unfocused. He kept shaking his head, his big body trembling. "I heard it," he whispered, over and over again. Just for a second, when the signal hit, I heard a crack in my head. He wasn't psychic like Arlo, but he was sensitive enough to have felt the barest echo of the psychic shockwave. It had been enough to break him. And then there was Rostova. She stood alone, frozen in the center of the bridge, her authority stripped away, her confidence shattered. She stared at the main view screen, where the crystal city of the Lumina was now visibly degrading. Cracks spider-webbed across the towers, and a fine glittering dust, the remains of the shattered structures, was being kicked up into the silent atmosphere. She had come seeking a monument to another species' intelligence. Instead, she had created one for humanity's ignorance. "Stop the broadcast," she said, her voice a hollow shell of its former self. Jax didn't move. He was lost in his own private hell. "Jax," I said. "Stop the broadcast," Rostova shouted, a hint of her old fire returning. Jax flinched, looking at her with terrified eyes. "It's too late, Captain. The primary signal stopped, but the planet, it's ringing. Like a bell we struck too hard. It's resonating. It's tearing itself apart." Carter looked up from his console. "He's right, Eva. The energy we pumped into their city has created a feedback loop in their crystalline structures. The entire planet is caught in a self-destruct sequence. The seismic activity is increasing exponentially. The city will be dust in a matter of hours." The finality of his words hung in the air. They hadn't just murdered the Lumina. They had salted the earth of their entire world, ensuring nothing of their beautiful, tragic civilization would remain. They had erased them from the universe. The psychic screaming in Arlo's mind finally began to fade, replaced by a vast, aching emptiness. It was the silence he had first encountered, but 1,000 times deeper. Before, it had been the silence of a held breath. Now, it was the silence of a corpse. The last of the Lumina were gone, their minds finally and irrevocably broken. He pushed himself up, his body aching, his mind feeling ancient and scarred. He looked at his crewmates, these 4 other humans trapped with him in this metal coffin, and for the first time, he felt the thing the Lumina had felt. He felt the noise. It wasn't a psychic broadcast, not like the Lumina song. It was just humanity. He could feel Lena's frantic, self-hating grief. He could feel Carter's cold, analytical horror. He could feel Jax's splintering paranoia, the man's simple faith shattered, and replaced with a gibbering fear of the things in his own head. And worst of all, he could feel Rostova's crumbling pride, the shriek of her ego as it died, the terror of a woman who had just realized she was not a hero, but a villain in a story far older and more important than her own. This cacophony, this storm of raw, unfiltered emotion and thought, was what they broadcasted into the universe just by existing. They were psychic radio towers spewing static, and they had just stumbled into a galaxy of beings who communicated with quiet music. "We need to leave," Arlo said, his voice raspy. "Now." Rostova turned to look at him. Her face was a ruin. "Leave? Where do we go? Back to Earth? To tell them what we did? to tell them that our manifest destiny is to be a galactic plague. I don't know, Arlo said. But we can't stay here. This place is a tomb now. We are desecrating it just by being in orbit. Suddenly, Jax let out a strangled cry. He pointed a shaking finger at Arlo. It's him. He brought it on board. The silence, the whispers. He's the one who's doing this to us. Jax, calm down, Carter said, moving toward him cautiously. Arlo is not the cause of this. He is, Jax screamed, his eyes rolling. He listened to them. He let them in. They're in his head, and now they're trying to get in mine. Make it stop. Make him stop. The paranoia had found a target. In Jax's broken mind, Arlo was no longer a crewmate. He was the source of the curse, the carrier of the alien contamination. The descent into madness had begun, and they were all locked in a tiny metal box together. A quarter of a galaxy, from a home they might no longer deserve. Jax's paranoia was a fire doused with gasoline. He saw Arlo not as a friend, but as an infection, a conduit for the alien horror that had shattered his mind. Get him out of here, Jax roared, scrambling away, pressing himself against the far wall of the bridge. He's broadcasting it. I can feel it. The quiet. It's trying to get in my head. Jax, that's not what's happening, Carter said, trying to use his calm, therapeutic voice. It was like trying to calm a hurricane. You experienced a psychic shock. Your mind is trying to make sense of it. Shut up, Jax bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at the psychologist. You are with him. You are all with him. Rostova, roused from her stupor by the immediate crisis, stepped forward. Engineer, stand down. That is an order. But her authority was gone. Jax just laughed, a high, unhinged sound that was terrifying coming from such a large man. Orders. Your orders got us here. Your orders killed a world. The ship, which had been a symbol of human achievement, had become a pressure cooker. The 5 of them were trapped, their own psychic noise. Fear, guilt, paranoia, bouncing off the walls, amplifying with each passing second. Arlo could feel it all, a nauseating swirl of ugly emotions. He finally understood the luminous choice. Silence, even the silence of self-destruction, was preferable to this. He had to get away, not just from Jax, but from all of them. I am going to my quarters, he said, his voice low. No, you are not, Jax shrieked. Before anyone could react, he lunged. Jax was a big man, built for wrestling with stubborn engine conduits, not for fighting. But fear gave him a wild, unpredictable strength. He slammed into Arlo, sending both of them crashing to the deck. Arlo's head hit the metal floor with a sickening thud. The world exploded into stars. Through the ringing in his ears, Arlo could hear Lena screaming. He felt Jax's heavy hands close around his throat. The engineer's face was inches from his, twisted into a mask of pure terror and hate. I'll make you quiet, he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. I'll make you all quiet. Arlo scrabbled at Jax's hands, his vision starting to go dark at the edges. He couldn't breathe. This was it. After surviving the death of a world, he was going to be killed by a terrified crewmate. Then there was a sharp hiss and a grunt. The pressure on his throat vanished. He gasped, sucking in air, a raw, burning fire in his lungs. He rolled over, coughing, and saw Carter standing over Jax's unconscious form, a hypospray injector in his hand. He had injected the engineer with a powerful sedative. Rostova and Lena helped Arlo to his feet. He was shaking, his neck already starting to bruise. He needs to be confined to the med bay, Carter said, his voice grim as he checked Jax's pulse. He's had a complete psychotic break. He's a danger to himself and the crew. As Lena and Carter struggled to drag the heavy, unconscious engineer off the bridge, Rostova turned to Arlo. The look on her face was one he'd never seen before. It was a look of utter defeat. "You were right," she said, the words barely a whisper. "From the very beginning you were right." She looked at the view screen, at the silent, dying world. "My whole life I dreamed of this moment. First contact, I thought it would be our species' greatest achievement. Instead," she trailed off, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm a monster, Arlo. We're all monsters." "We're not monsters," Arlo said, his throat raw. "We're just loud. We're clumsy. We're like children who don't know their own strength, stomping through a garden we didn't know was there." She looked at him, her eyes searching his. "What do we do now? Where do we go?" It was the same question she'd asked before, but this time it wasn't a challenge. It was a plea. The captain was asking the communications officer for orders. The chain of command was broken. The mission was a failure. Everything they thought they were was a lie. Arlo looked past her at the stars scattered across the view screen. A million points of light, a million other gardens, a million other symphonies playing in the dark. And humanity, the screaming ones, were just getting started. The Odyssey was just the first of many ships that would venture out. "The prophecy," Arlo said, a new, terrible purpose solidifying in his mind. "The prophecy wasn't just a warning about us. It can be a warning from us." He walked over to his comm station, the place where it had all begun. The console was dark, silent. It felt right. "We can't go back to Earth," he said, thinking aloud. "If we do, they'll just send more ships. They'll try to fix what happened here. They'll build ships with psychic shielding or send teams of diplomats. They won't understand. They can't. They'll just keep making it worse." "So, what's the alternative?" Rostova asked, her voice small. "We just drift out here until we die." "No," Arlo said, his fingers resting on the cold, dead controls of his station. "We become the lonely ones. We become the keepers of the new silence." He looked at her, the idea blooming. Fully formed, the Lumina sent their last song to us, a warning that went unheard. We can take that song, add our own verse, and send it out to everyone else. Not on human frequencies, we'll broadcast it on the frequencies of the galaxy. A new prophecy, a new warning. We can tell them who we are, what we do. We can warn them to hide, to go silent, to prepare. We can give them a chance the Lumina never had. He was proposing a life of exile, a mission not of discovery, but of quarantine. They would become a ghost ship, crewed by the ghosts of a failed mission. Their only purpose to be a galactic lighthouse, warning all other ships away from the coming storm. The storm of humanity. Rostova stared at him, the full weight of his proposal sinking in. A life sentence among the stars, forever separated from their home, their only companions, the guilt of what they'd done. It was a terrible choice, but it was the only choice they had left. The decision settled over the remaining crew of the Odyssey like a shroud. There was no vote, no formal declaration. There was only a quiet, shared understanding. Their old lives were over. Earth was a memory. Their new purpose was penance. They spent 2 more days orbiting the dead world of Aethel. Carter kept Jax sedated in the medbay, a merciful sleep to protect him from the wreckage of his own mind. Lena, the biologist, worked tirelessly with Arlo. Her grief had been channeled into a fierce, protective energy. She analyzed the Song of Sorrow, the last message of the Lumina, breaking it down into its core components. The mathematical expressions, the harmonic keys, the resonant frequencies that spoke the language of the cosmos. It was their Rosetta Stone. Arlo, meanwhile, worked on the message itself. How do you write a warning that can be understood by 1,000 different kinds of minds, most of which you can't even imagine? He couldn't use words. Words were human, part of the psychic noise. He had to use the language of the Lumina, math, music, and raw emotion. He sat at his comm station, which was no longer a listening post, but a composer's desk. He felt like he was writing a eulogy and a fire alarm at the same time. He started with the Lumina's song, its beautiful, heartbreaking melody of sorrow and severance. That was the foundation. It would be the hello, the part that other species like the Lumina might recognize and listen to. Then came the new verse, humanity's verse. He couldn't use images of people or ships. That was too specific. He had to describe the effect, not the cause. Working with Lena, he found a way to translate the concept of I, the selfish, individualistic, chaotic nature of human consciousness, into a discordant, jarring sequence of chords. It was the musical equivalent of static, of 1,000 voices all talking at once and saying nothing. It was the sound of humanity's soul, and it was ugly. He then added a simple repeating mathematical sequence that meant danger. A prime number progression, a universal sign of intelligence, but twisted and inverted to mean warning. Finally, he wove in the emotional component. He sat in the chair, closed his eyes and thought about what he had felt when the Lumina died. He focused on the agony, the terror, the crushing finality of it. He let IV, the ship's AI, translate his own brain's raw emotional signals into a resonant frequency. It was the most honest thing he had ever done. The final message was a chilling piece of music. It started with the Lumina's beautiful lament, then descended into a chaotic, noisy hell, punctuated by a clear warning and ending on a long, sustained note of pure terror and loss. It said, without a single word, something beautiful was here. Then came a noise like this: be afraid, be silent. While they worked, Rostova took on the role of quartermaster for their new, unending mission. She was a different person. The iron certainty was gone, replaced by a quiet, grim determination. She inventoried their supplies, calculated their energy consumption and plotted a course. Not to a destination, but a path. A long looping trajectory that would take them through the most promising, life-bearing sectors of this arm of the galaxy. They would be the town criers of the apocalypse, sailing just ahead of the wave. On the third day, the message was ready. The planet below was now completely still. The crystal spires had crumbled into glittering dust, and the seismic tremors had ceased. The tomb was sealed. Arlo took his seat at the comm station. Lena, Carter, and Rostova stood behind him. Jax was asleep in the medbay, his own silence a tragic echo of the planet's. "Ready?" Rostova asked. Her voice was soft. Arlo nodded. He looked at the picture of Lily taped to his console. His heart ached. He was saving a galaxy from humanity, but in doing so he was abandoning his own daughter. He would never see her grow up. She would never know what happened to her father. She would only know that he went away and never came back. Perhaps, he thought with a bitter pang of irony, that was for the best. She would be safer in a galaxy that was warned, even if the warning came at the cost of her father's love. He initiated the broadcast. There was no sound on the bridge, but he could feel the power surging through the ship's comms array, a far more complex and subtle signal than the one Rostova had used before. It wasn't a battering ram. It was a seed of knowledge, a seed of fear. It rippled out from the Odyssey, not in a narrow beam but in a wide, gentle wave, traveling at the speed of light in all directions. He let the message loop for a full hour, imprinting it on the fabric of space-time, a scar of a warning for anyone who might be listening. Then he cut the transmission. The bridge was quiet. "Set course, Captain," Arlo said, not looking away from the stars on the screen. "Where to?" Rostova asked, though she already knew the answer. "Away," Arlo said. "Just away." The Odyssey turned its nose from the dead world of Aethel. The engines engaged, not with a roar but with a low hum. The ship slid forward into the endless dark. They were a bottle with a message inside, thrown into a cosmic ocean. They didn't know if anyone would find it or if it would be read in time. All they knew was that they had to try. The great silence had been a prophecy of their arrival. Now it was their sacred duty. Years bled into one another. The interior of the Odyssey became their universe. The hum of the life support was the only wind, the glow of the hydroponics bay, the only sun. They were four ghosts haunting a metal shell, their lives measured not in days or weeks, but in broadcast cycles. They sailed through star systems that shimmered with promise. They passed emerald green planets wrapped in methane clouds, and water worlds whose oceans were so vast they had no continents. At each one they would slow the ship, and Arlo would go to his station. He would send their message, the song of sorrow and screaming, out into the void. Then, without waiting for a reply, they would move on. They were Johnny Appleseeds of terror, planting warnings in silent gardens. Arlo grew older. Gray threaded his dark hair, and lines etched themselves around his eyes. The picture of Lily was faded and worn, the smile of the 7-year-old a relic from another lifetime. He wondered if she was still alive. He wondered if the expensive gene therapies had worked. He wondered if she ever looked up at the stars and thought of him. He hoped she didn't. He hoped she was happy, living her loud, chaotic, beautiful human life on a world that had no idea of the silence it caused. Lena dedicated her life to the study of the void. She found new ways to detect biosignatures, to identify the subtle music of life from light years away. She became their navigator, guiding them to the worlds that needed the warning most. She rarely smiled, but there was a fierce purpose in her eyes. She had become the shepherd of a flock she could never meet. Carter cared for them all. He cared for Jax, who never fully recovered. The engineer lived in a quiet, simple world now, tending the plants in the hydroponics bay, his mind forever fractured by the echo of a scream. And Carter cared for the others, for their minds and souls. He led them in meditations, not for peace, but for focus, to keep the crushing weight of their guilt and isolation from destroying them. He was the keeper of their sanity. Rostova was their captain. She ran the ship with a quiet efficiency that was born not of ambition, but of necessity. She maintained the engines, rationed their supplies, and held them all together. The iron was gone, but in its place was a strength that was far more resilient. She was serving her sentence with a stoic grace that Arlo sometimes found breathtaking. One cycle, as they entered a system around a stable yellow star, much like Earth's own sun, Lena called Arlo to her station. Her face was tense. "Arlo, look at this." She pointed to her screen. It showed a planet, the third from the star. It was teeming with biosignatures. More than that, it was broadcasting. Arlo's blood ran cold. Human. No, Lena said, shaking her head. Not even close. The signals are complex, far more so than the luminous. It's a different kind of music, but they're loud. They're broadcasting everywhere. They're talking. They had found another one, a talkative, vibrant, and completely oblivious civilization. Do they know? Arlo asked. Lena ran a quick analysis of the planet's M spectrum. No signs of our warning signal being received or understood. They're still singing their own song. They have no idea what's coming. Arlo looked at the tactical display. A long-range scan showed a blip, a tiny speck moving toward this system from the direction of human space. It was still years away, but it was coming. A human colony ship, most likely. The second wave. The warning hadn't reached everyone. The fire was spreading. Arlo went to his comm station. The worn chair groaned under his weight. He looked at Lily's picture, then at the image of the singing planet on his screen. They had failed. They were too slow, the galaxy too vast. What are you doing? Rostova asked, coming up behind him. I am going to talk to them, Arlo said. He wasn't going to send the warning and run this time. He was going to break their own rule. Arlo, no, Lena said, her voice filled with alarm. Our thoughts. Our presence. I know, Arlo said. But just sending the signal isn't enough. They need to understand why. They need to hear it from the monster itself. He began to configure the comms array, not for a broad looping broadcast, but for a direct, targeted transmission. He was going to aim a rifle, not a shotgun. He isolated a single powerful frequency the new aliens were using. He wouldn't use his own chaotic thoughts. He had learned, over the long silent years, to quiet his mind, to find a place of stillness inside himself. It was a skill born of endless meditation and profound loneliness. He would send the warning, but he would shield it with the one pure, selfless thing he had left. He closed his eyes and he thought of Lily. He didn't think of his own love for her or his pain at losing her. That was the noise. Instead, he thought only of her smile, of her safety, of his hope that she would live a long, happy life. He focused all of his being into a single crystalline feeling, the pure, selfless love a father has for his child. It was the quietest, most powerful thought in his mind. He wrapped that feeling around the warning, the song, the static, the scream. He would send them the poison, but he would send it inside a vessel of love, hoping it would be understood as a gift, not an attack. He took a deep breath, and he sent the message. He felt it leave the ship, a focused beam of music and love and terror. It shot across the millions of miles to the singing planet. For a long moment, there was no response. The planet just kept on with its happy, oblivious song. Arlo's heart sank. It hadn't worked. And then, one by one, the alien signals began to change. Their music didn't stop. It didn't shatter. It grew softer, more questioning, more somber. They were listening. They were understanding. Then a single new signal came back, a simple, gentle melody. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a scream. It was a song of two notes. Arlo had Ivy translate it. The meaning was unmistakable. Thank you. The planet's broadcasts began to systematically power down. They were not erasing themselves like the Lumina. They were just quieting down, pulling the blinds, hiding, getting ready. Arlo leaned back in his chair, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. They had not been too late. They had saved one. He looked out at the infinite field of stars, at the endless work ahead. The great silence was a terrible prophecy, but he had found a new truth. Silence didn't have to be an ending. It could be a beginning. It could be the quiet moment of preparation before the storm. It could be the breath a universe takes before it braces for the arrival of humanity. His work was not over. It would never be over. He was the lonely shepherd, and his flock was the stars. He closed his eyes and began composing the next warning.